When you review this PowerPoint slide and read the manual, be mindful of those learning objectives that are described in the manual. And let's begin by reviewing what those learning objectives are. There are a few key proficiencies that you will need to both be aware of and to master as a wellness coach. The first is to understand the steps to behavior change, and we will spend a great deal of time learning the details of your client's stage of readiness to change. Because this is an important part of wellness coaching, we will also learn coaching strategies within each stage or level of readiness. Keeping in mind that wellness coaches really only encourage clients to formulate their own needs for change, as well as solutions, we will explore the concept of decisional balance in this chapter. Then we will conclude Part 6 with an extensive list of coaching guidelines from the International Coaching Federation. Different theories related to behavior change have come forth within the science of psychology. As a wellness coach, you should view behavior change as the primary goal of most coaching interactions with clients in order to facilitate client growth by way of behavior changes necessary to improve wellness. One model that has provided structure for coaching is the Transtheoretical model, which allows us to look at behavior in different stages. How we interact with our client will depend on which stage of readiness they are in, and therefore, it's extremely important to be able to identify this level seen from within your client. The Transtheoretical model emphasizes cognitive, behavioral, and relational processes of behavior, and therefore provides a convenient template for you to deliver coaching services to your client. Although wellness coaching is a more personal service, we are now less concerned here with our clients' perspectives than we are about their specific stage of readiness to change a certain behavior. If you have ever tried to change a bad behavior or a bad habit, you might be able to better understand just how difficult behavior change can be for your client. But because behavior change is a stepwise process, our clients can be moved through the change process at intervals that are more comfortable to them. Unfortunately, the stepwise process also allows behaviors to lapse or relapse if great care is not taken during the process. To prevent failed efforts at behavior change, it's important to identify different applications or strategies and techniques that facilitate coaching toward healthy outcomes for our client. Although this may seem like a new concept for some, identifying stages of readiness in the client can be pretty easy. This is typically done by evaluating the language used to express their thoughts. As we move through the different stages, we will provide examples of different statements that you may hear from your client during various stages of readiness. For this course, we will use the term stage of readiness or stages to change interchangeably, as they generally mean the same thing. The pre-contemplation stage is characterized by the client not being able to make any changes in behavior. A client in this stage of readiness has not even begun to think about making changes. Now, in the contemplation stage, the client is thinking about making changes to their behaviors. Once through this stage, the client may then start to prepare to make behavior changes by way of self-assessment and guidance or direction from the coach. The action phase involves the client engaging in an action plan to change a particular behavior. And the last stage is the maintenance stage. By the time a client has reached the maintenance stage, they are successful at a particular behavior change after moving through the 4 previous steps. But by now, the client is maintaining this behavior as a habit. Let's talk more specifically about these stages, starting with the pre-contemplation stage. If you have a client who has not considered adopting healthy behaviors or changes to their risky behaviors, they most likely fall into one of 2 categories. This would include those who won't make a change or those who cannot make a change. A client who won't make a behavior change is not interested in making any efforts to eliminate risky behaviors, and this may be because they don't feel they have a problem to begin with. A client who cannot make a change is someone who's most likely feeling that the change would be too difficult for them, or they do not know how to make a change in their behavior. If we were to pick an ideal stage for a coach to intervene with the client, this would not be the stage. It is best for us to concentrate efforts toward those who are at least ready to explore options of changing behavior. Coaching during this stage, therefore, is a little bit different. Now, we're not really going to strategize with someone who doesn't feel they have anything to strategize over. Instead, it's important to show empathy and support toward this person. And we use the word person here because at this point, the subject is not likely to become a client in this particular stage of readiness. But in an effort to help facilitate later behavior changes, it is a good practice to use reflections in conversation with someone in this stage of readiness to demonstrate that you have both heard and understand their feelings. It's also important to know about the characteristics of someone in this stage because it determines how future interactions geared toward behavior change may occur. Leaving the door open to coaching for this person is still important. This will help the subject to feel positive about the interaction, even though there really is no coaching opportunity here. The contemplation stage is the next progression in the stage of readiness. Language from the client may include statements like, "I may" or "I might be wanting to make a change." Any client in this stage is thinking about changing an unhealthy or risky behavior and is exploring information about why they should change while factoring in the likelihood that they can be effective at change. This is a really important step for a wellness coach to recognize. With good wellness coaching, your client will be more aware of benefits tied to changing a certain behavior, while they may also acknowledge or be honest about being less than satisfied with their present state of health or wellness. Still, it is not unlike the client in this stage to have a fair amount of reluctance. Some clients can be stuck in the stage of readiness for a long period of time, and we call this group chronic contemplators. One characteristic of a client in this stage might include someone who might not be able to imagine seeing themselves behaving in a certain way. It's important during the contemplation stage to seize the opportunity presented. This is best done by trying to connect the client to their natural strengths and abilities because it will help them to build confidence while also encouraging them to be more motivated about changing a certain behavior. With the proper motivation, your client may be more able to easily move into the next stage of readiness. During initial assessments with your client, try to extract or elicit from them what their values are and what's important to them. Then, connect any changes the client is thinking about making to the values that they have expressed. This will create the proper setting for behavior change. Sometimes our clients do not clearly define which stage they are in, and this will require that the coach intervene and help the client to see a clear vision of what they want. Be sure to refer back to the session tied to your client's vision on how to get this information from them. During the coaching relationship with the client in the preparation stage, we want to take advantage of someone in this stage of readiness in order to prepare them for behavior changes. One way to solidify commitments from your client include journaling or other forms of writing that can represent formal commitments from your client. Clients in this stage should be encouraged to journal or write in specific detail in order to demonstrate their level of commitment. Another role of the coach during this stage is to help a client think about those small steps that will help them toward their vision. Part of preparing for behavior change requires both the coach and client identify situations that could become problematic before the change effort has really begun. This implies that barriers and obstacles might still be present, and again, due to the overlap possibility in readiness stages, this is likely to occur. Being able to identify and troubleshoot or strategize around these barriers and obstacles is required not only for success towards a positive outcome, but also requires forward thinking from your client about their vision. A client in the action stage of readiness has been able to identify behaviors that they would like to change or modify for a certain goal, but this is still a new behavior. During this stage, the client is actually doing the behavior change but working toward doing it with a high level of proficiency. If the proper groundwork has not been established in prior stages, the risk of lapse or relapse is at its highest during this level or stage of change. Being able to coach clients through these potential challenges requires that we have established open communication, and conversation becomes more geared toward creating plans to prevent a lapse or from becoming a total relapse. Coaching a client through the action stage is centered on the connections required to build your client's strengths and values to suit their environments, situations, or scenes. Other components of coaching within the action stage include framing to help the client to change their thought process or those cognitive strategies needed for behavior change. Again, looking forward to potential challenging situations should be discussed with the client in order to help them cope better during the change process. During the maintenance stage, the client will again provide you clues as to their stage of readiness with language that reveals their ability to make changes and then to try to maintain those changes over time. This is defined by those times when their behavior is able to actually become a new habit for them. The typical time frame for this to occur is in the 12 to 24 week period. During this stage, your client has shown the ability to have more confidence in their efforts to change, and this is good because the maintenance stage is also very complex. We'll need to be able to address maintaining behavior change in the face of boredom or relapses or even gradually slipping back into an old behavior. If your client experiences this during the maintenance stage, it might be most useful to reassess the client's goals and then to refocus efforts to understand why the client wanted to make a change in the first place. A coach can try new strategies to redirect a client if they feel that they are at risk for a relapse. Lapses and relapses can be problematic during this stage. If your client experiences this during this stage, they've decided to abandon efforts to maintain an attempt at changing a risky behavior. Again, reconnecting the client with their strengths, values, resources, visions, motivators, and goals would be strategies used in the coaching process. Maintenance stage coaching requires reconnecting your client to a value or behavior in relation to their vision. Now, during this time, it's most appropriate to challenge your client with new behavior changes that allow them to grow personally by using goals that are both meaningful and attainable. Reinforcing the use of support networks is a great way to motivate your client by reconnecting them with positive role models. If your client should relapse, it's important to reconnect them back to the change process as early as possible. Once you have your client back on track, be sure to re-strategize in order to prevent this sort of breakdown from occurring again. Using reflection may allow the client to effectively communicate to you exactly what caused the relapse in behavior. Through informal assessment during the coaching process, we get a lot of information from our clients. We determine their stage of readiness by the language they use, and we also observe their behaviors as part of the client-centered approach. It's important to be tactical with your conversation coaching interactions so that you can draw from your client what their positive core values are. Now, this doesn't mean automatically that we're looking for a client's willingness to exercise or to eat properly, but includes anything in our client's life that is a concern related to their health and wellness. If the coach recognizes positive language in conversations, there may be an opportunity to continue expanding upon thoughts that are conveyed from the client. The client's positive core will then come through. This again refers to their character strengths and their core values and the primary motivators for change. Since we know obstacles and barriers present a risk to our client's change effort, troubleshooting the known challenges now is supplemented with the commitment from the client to take those steps needed to work around obstacles and barriers. In the field of psychology, the Transtheoretical model not only recognizes the client's stage of readiness but also assumes that strategies to change behavior are part of a process. For the client, the goal is to help them identify what processes might work best for them to change behavior during different stages. This will involve understanding both cognitive and behavioral processes. In other words, how our client thinks and acts. The first step to the cognitive process involves the client exploring new information about a behavior change and is learning more facts about risky behaviors. Due to the emotional component involved with the cognitive processes, you can see that this is an important part of the behavior change process. You may need to remind your client of how unwanted behaviors might be affecting others close to them or how beneficial it will be for them to make a change in their behavior. Another component of the cognitive process involves your client's self-image. The key to developing a healthy self-image lies within the client's perceived relevance when considering visions, behaviors, and values. One of the best ways to promote cognitive processes that are beneficial to the client include encouraging them to spend time with people who share similar values or those who are working on similar behavior changes. This could even be the client's support group. To better understand the impact of behavioral processes on behavior change in general, be aware that learning processes during behavior change are those that are more action-oriented. Because this is a new behavior, your client is most likely to experiment before mastering behavior change efforts. From a behavioral perspective, try substituting risky behaviors with those that might be healthier but still feasible. An example would be substituting nicotine gum for a client who's trying to quit smoking. If your client is able to recruit support from their support network, be sure to provide specific ways for the client to ask for the type of help that is needed from the group. This requires openness, and not only from within the coach and client relationship, but from the client and their support network as well. It should also follow that the use of rewards is a positive behavior that positively reinforces behavior changes and increases your client's self-confidence and self-efficacy. Decisional Balance is a really easy tool that we can use to help our clients decide which direction they would like to go with respect to behavior change. This is an effective way to engage our client in the process of behavior change by impacting the cognitive processes that are part of the behavior change process overall. When the client uses Decisional Balance, they are able to look at both the pros and cons of a particular behavior change. Now, research shows that when clients can weigh the pros and cons of a decision, they can be more successful by coming to their own decisions on their own terms. Decisional Balance requires that the client look at a specific behavior change by reflecting on how making a change versus not making a change can create a list of both pros and cons. Essentially, the client is learning to understand the advantages of changing a behavior while also exploring the disadvantages of leaving behavior unchanged or status quo. One benefit of Decisional Balance is that it helps the client achieve more clarity with their goals. Once the pros of changing the behavior are revealed, the client is able to see benefits, motivating them toward changing an unwanted behavior. With direction from the coach, statements about change from the client should be specifically clarified. The example in your manual is a pretty good one, involving the statement from the client who wanted to stop drinking, but the coach reframed the statement with clarity by drawing from the client why they wanted to quit drinking. This sort of clarity may be required for a client to really be able to see the pros and cons of any real behavior changes. With behavior change already known to be difficult, you may need to reframe your client's perspectives to help them change a behavior that they are stuck in. Be aware of clients who tend to use these cons that are revealed in Decisional Balance as a way of presenting excuses against behavior change efforts. Making decisions and balancing the pros and cons of behavior change may require some intervention from the coach. Try to drive the process by motivating your client with a technique called motivational interviewing. This would involve using questions like, "Why is it that you would like to change this behavior?" or "Why shouldn't you try to change this behavior at this time?" In an effort to uncover potential barriers, you may also want to ask the client, "What would it take for you to change this behavior?" Notice that these are all open-ended questions. If coaching intervention is required for the Decisional Balance process, approach this task with 3 points in mind: cultivating motivators, recognizing and understanding barriers, and then strategizing solutions. These are all ways that the coach can facilitate behavior change by overcoming cognitive barriers from the client. Change efforts for your client will be a lot more likely if they are able to see themselves as effective. When a client demonstrates sufficient levels of self-efficacy, they reach a point where they believe that they can initiate and sustain behavior changes. The circular relationship between your client's beliefs and actions is expressed in their self-efficacy. In other words, the more your client believes that they can make changes for themselves, the more likely they are to be able to do it. So in this way, beliefs fuel action, and this is a powerful measure of success for the client to experience because it, in turn, increases their self-efficacy. Your client's stage of readiness also parallels their feelings of self-efficacy. It would be inappropriate to expect your client to be effective at a behavior goal if they were not in the proper stage of readiness, and this could severely and negatively impact their feelings of how effective they can be about making changes in unwanted behaviors, not only now, but looking ahead. In the classic sense, behavior change through positive and negative reinforcement is known as operant conditioning, and this reinforcement strategy can be useful for clients in that it allows for direct consequences of certain behaviors, both good and bad. Although it's always preferred to change behaviors before negative consequences occur, a client who presents with negative thinking is going to be more likely to fall into a negative cycle if behaviors and consequences are not matched accordingly. This is why it's important to reward positive behavior changes. The best way to coach a client to understand behavior and consequences is to create goals that are manageable for the client so that they can feel confident about staying on track. We've talked a little bit about listening skills and what to listen for from your client. Now everyone, including your client, will engage in what we call self-talk. But this can be problematic if your client is experiencing challenges or the difficulties tied to behavior change. Remember that a client can be coached to use change talk in either a negative or positive manner. When you hear negative thinking expressed from your client in their words, you may need to consider that the client is in a pre-contemplative stage with regard to a specific behavior. To be able to coach and intervene with the client in this scenario, try eliciting change talk from the client. Change talk is a way to encourage the client to say those things that they know within their minds already. This is drawn from the client by doing motivational interviewing and asking questions that make the client think about change. When this is done repeatedly, clients might begin to believe that change is more likely. Without really knowing it, your clients are looking for you to establish connections. Now, we've mentioned this before, but specifically, they're looking for you to connect the positive core, their strengths, attitudes, values, and resources for learning and growth. One important strategy to remember is that reassuring clients in the early stages about the potential for lapses will help clients to build self-confidence and self-efficacy. In early stages, be reassuring clients that these lapses are okay. It's not really necessary to mention the Transtheoretical model or stages of readiness to the client, but it's important for you to be aware of the likelihood that lapses are more common in the beginning or early stages of behavior change. Another characteristic of early stages of readiness include confidence levels that are typically low. If at all possible, encourage the client to accept any reluctance or ambivalence within their mindset. Again, providing clients with the belief that this is okay to feel this way or that it's normal is an indirect way to help the client build their confidence. Our clients don't like for us to view them as having failed at a behavior change effort, and some will even take this to the extreme by expressing guilt using statements like, "If I had only listened," or "Maybe if I had done what I knew I should, this may not have happened." But this is actually another form of negative talk and thinking. So try to redirect the client to look more for internal motivations because this sort of guilt typically has an external source. Motivation has to be solid from within your client. When statements are made that reveal wavering levels of motivation, it's best to seek clarity from the client by asking once again, why do you really want to make this change? And if your client eventually learns to take control and responsibility for their own wellness, the process of change should be considered a breakthrough because it shows that the client has connected with their own motivations, whether they are internal or external. Effective coaching strategies require a great deal of thought and planning on the coach's part. But once this is done and out of the way, you can then focus more on evaluating and reassessing your client. Does your client show progress in steps toward positive behavior changes, or have they regressed to an earlier stage? Dialogue with your client expressed during dynamic interactions will reveal levels of commitment and the client's connections to the process. If your client shows that they're not making progress towards goals or changes after 30 days, first reevaluate their goals. If the client's goals seem realistic, you may need to reevaluate the client's level of commitment to the process of behavior change. You may find the core coaching competencies provided in your manual to be useful as a template to help your client manage change.